Going live. You are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of MACHTAILS from the Cantina live. Yes, it's live, so that means I got my jitters. Time to have a sip of wine. We have not done a live show since our last live impromptu show, which was Music Monday. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the 2021 nominees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I want to give a shout out to my Patreon members for supporting what I do. I want to give a shout out to you guys too that aren't patrons, that are watching what I do. And I really, really appreciate the support. Head over to Patreon, check out MACHTAILS from the Cantina. I do a segment called Inside the Wampa Cave. And inside the Wampa Cave, I'm in the Fillmore Poster Room, which is a wing off of the Wampa Cave, which is my Star Wars collection. So I share pieces from my collection. I'm going to keep this Star Wars related, even though we're going to talk about music tonight. Years ago, Fernandez Guitars put out these really cool volume control knobs. We got Boba Fett, Vader, and Stormtrooper. My sister gave me two of those for my birthday. They came out in 2002. They also released this really cool line of guitars, but I never got one of those. They also released, and you guys might know some of this stuff, they released these picks, these guitar picks, right? They got Vader, Stormtrooper, Han, and Chewie. I think I'm missing a couple. And on the back, it's got the Star Wars logo with the character name and the company that made it. But these are not guitar picks. This is a guitar pick by my friend John Ferreira. I'm probably butchering his last name as well. I'm going to butcher a lot of last names tonight, as I always do. But this is a guitar pick that he did for Lemmy Trooper. And you can win stuff like this on our regular live shows. This is a really cool pin. It's got magnets, all kinds of cool stuff. So, hey, tonight, I got behind the controls my good friend Tyler Page of the Babu Freaks. He's been on before. Hey, I'm going to bring Tyler on real quick. Hey. Tyler, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. It's always good.
I got my old friend Billy Mack, too. We've been getting a lot of Billy Mack lately. Hopefully you guys are okay with that. I know I am. So, hey, Tyler, what have you been listening to this week, music-wise?
I was listening to Cake earlier today. I grew up with Cake, first concert I went to, and that's sort of my go-to when I'm having a down day or a Monday, and I just need something to groove to. So, yeah. Yeah,
we've chatted about Cake before. I got some cool stories, but tonight we're talking Rock Hall stuff. But hey, Tyler, again, thank you for your help, and I'm going to put you back behind the scene there. I appreciate everything you do for me. So tonight we're going to talk about the 2021 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. Now, the way that I was introduced to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it was through a musician, psychobilly, rockabilly musician called Mojo Nixon. And he wrote a song called The Rock and Roll Hall of Lame. And for the longest time, I thought the Rock Hall was lame because it was very much run like the Oscars or the Grammys. People on the board that didn't really give two shits, or they didn't have the knowledge about what they were voting for or what they were presenting. For example, when Metallica lost the Grammy for Best Heavy Metal Group to Jethro Tull, that was kind of the same fashion that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame did. Now, it was founded in 1983. It's a nonprofit. It still is nonprofit. It was founded by Ahmet. I cannot pronounce his last name. I'm not even going to try. But he was the president of Atlantic Records, and he was the guy that signed Led Zeppelin. Well, I became more acquainted with the message of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and over the years, it's changed. Thank you to Tom Morello. I just heard Tom Morello's interview on Howard Stern. He is part of the board of committees. I believe Dave Grohl is. Howard Stern described this as like a secret society. But me and my friend Billy Mack, I'm going to bring Billy Mack on. We're not musicologists, But what gives us the right to discuss this topic is we are very passionate about music, sometimes even more than we are about Star Wars. I know I am, at least. And, we have this diverse knowledge and love for it. So we're going to be talking about our 5 picks on the show. There's 16 people, 16 artists that are nominated. You guys can go over there and vote every day. And Billy, I want to thank you again, man, for just sharing this Music Monday moment. What have you been listening to this week, man? And what are you drinking, first and foremost?
Well, I'm drinking a Coke Zero.
Oh, a Coke Zero.
I know. I'm completely destroying the theme of this show.
That's okay. That is okay.
It's a work night for me, and I just I would love to imbibe, but I can't do it. I can't do it.
I was going to pass on the libations, but I get so nervous doing these live shows. I needed to calm the nerves. So what are you listening to lately, I should say?
Well, if you promise not to laugh, I've been re-examining the glory of the KISS solo albums from 1978. Gene Simmons, Peter Criss, Paul Stanley, and Ace Frehley solo albums, which pretty much destroyed that that version of the band, the original lineup. I think that was the beginning of the end for them. But they're actually pretty good albums. And,
I gotta say, my favorite solo album has got to be Ace Frehley's. Has to be.
I think Ace's is the best. People I think unfairly malign Peter Criss's albums. I think there's some really good tracks on his album. They're just not what you'd expect. There's like
completely different than KISS.
Gene Simmons, like his album has like a couple of ballads that are really, really good. But he's Gene Simmons. You just expect like a full-blown rock experience.
Right?
Really, yeah. But really, it's Paul and Ace who have the most rocking solo albums. But the other two aren't bad. Aren't as bad as remembered, I think. But yeah.
It's funny. I always said that my guilty pleasure is listening to KISS. KISS was actually my first dance with nostalgia before I rediscovered Star Wars. It was KISS and then Jim Henson and the Muppets, and then it was back to Star Wars. So it kind of like went full circle for me. But Dave Grohl actually, the Foo Fighters are one of the nominees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year. And he was actually, I want to say, he was the one that was either kind of pushed for KISS getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or he might have been the one that did their introduction. But last night, I was watching a documentary about Tina Turner. Now, you had talked about Tina on the last live show, and I know we were kind of talking about her picks beforehand, and you said, you know what, she was nominated, she's in the Rock Hall with Ike Turner. So right now she's up for her solo artist. And I got to tell you, man, after watching her documentary, I have to say that she really resurrected her career after the hardship that she had with Ike and Tina. She was the voice of Ike and Tina, and two, I think the only reason why she was not as popular as Janis Joplin, in my opinion, she's got a better voice. She just does it so much better. But Janis died in her prime. So, as a solo artist, though, I cannot stand the stuff that she put out in the 80s. And she is probably an example of many artists that were around in the 60s and 70s that were geniuses. And by the time the 80s came around, they cashed in because radio was big, MTV was huge. but all the music that all those guys put out, they were kind of at the end of their career or in the middle of their career, and the music was just god awful. So I think her as an artist by herself, her talent is nothing what she did with Ike and Tina. But the fact that she was able to run away from somebody like Ike that was so insecure, and so Ike was so insecure and he had control of Tina, I think that turmoil inspired her. And that darkest place that she was at, I mean, she was depressed, she was being beaten every night. Half of it was for just like random acts of violence. And if you go back and watch some of that early stuff that she did, it's amazing. But my vote for her is for her solo act, just because she was able to come back from the dead. And she reminds me of a baseball player's career. She didn't make crap the first 10 years, but she cashed in probably one of the biggest paychecks of her life by putting out that, Private Dancer. She was in the Mad Max movie. So even though I'm not a fan of what she did during that era, I'm a fan of her as a woman, a rock and roll pioneer from the early days, and just being able to continue what she did, The more I hear this woman, the more I fall in love with her.
Well, and she, I think her solo music, tended to veer towards like an adult contemporary type of sound. But she always remained a powerhouse live. I mean, she would show up. I remember didn't she appear at Live Aid with Mick Jagger? And I remember that as a kid. I was like, whoa, who is this? I didn't even know who she was, I don't think, at the time. And I found out about her earlier stuff later. But God, I saw a clip of her from maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And she was well into her 60s, and she still was just belting it out. Very high energy and looked great, so. Yeah,
I mean, she still has it. I just think that era that she wrote the music in, we're in the Fillmore Poster Room. I got this cool postcard here. It's a beautiful day headlining Ike and Tina.
Oh, that's awesome.
Alice Cooper opening. That is a hell of a lineup, man. But I don't know. That early stuff is it's brilliant, and it's hard to beat. Now, you were going to pick her, but you said, she's already in the Hall of Fame. So the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I must say, okay, here's the thing. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's a lot of artists in here that probably are not necessarily rock and roll. But when I took a deep dive into it, I realized that what the Rock Hall's mission was trying to do was they were trying to represent somebody from each genre. If it's not rock and roll, it was inspired by rock and roll, or rock and roll inspired it. So yeah, Tina Turner might not necessarily be rock and roll, and a lot of these picks, I don't know if you want to call them rock and roll. There's always going to be an argument, right? I think, like I said, the Rock Hall is changing direction. But Bill, who is your first pick here? And these are not in order.
Well, before I reveal that, yeah, I mean, just to add on to your point there. I mean, we're going off of a list of nominees. If we had our way, me and Chris, this isn't just like our picks. I mean, there are so many bands that I would love to see, and there's so many bands that were so late. I mean, it's amazing how long it took them. I mean, you mentioned Kiss. I mean, that was way overdue. Yeah, I mean,
Rush.
Say what you want about Kiss, but they're a legitimate, huge rock band. I mean, they
absolutely
have since the beginning. But anyway, my first pick, yeah, I did originally have Tina, and I figured, I understand she has the solo career, and then she has her career with Ike. To me, the stuff with Ike is the best stuff. But let's get somebody else in there instead of putting in an artist twice again. You know, I'm not saying she doesn't deserve to be in twice, but there's so many other people kind of waiting in the wings. So I changed her out with the Go-Go's. Not an expert on the Go-Go's, but let me talk a little bit about, well, first of all, there's Jane Wiedlin. I think I'm saying her name right. She's a big Star Wars fan. So, you know, there's points there just for that. My memory of the Go-Go's is very vivid from when I was a kid. I mean, anybody who was a kid in the 80s remembers how huge the moment was that the Go-Go's had in kind of the early mid 80s. Now, I didn't know all that much about the band, I have to be honest, until I saw their documentary, which I saw a couple months ago. It's a new documentary. I think it came out this year. It's on HBO or Showtime, maybe. And I didn't realize how short their career really was. They really only had like 3 albums. But I think I think they earned a spot. They were significant in that they were an all-female rock band. And really, when you think about it, there aren't that many. There are a lot of female vocal groups, certainly going way back. A lot of solo singers. There's a number of kind of singer-songwriter types, but not like a rock band that's all female. Very, very rare. They wrote all their songs, and they had roots. They had deep roots in the punk scene, which I did not know. I always thought of them as being very mainstream because they did reach that level of popularity. I think they're much more accessible to a general audience than, say, the Runaways were, which was also a fairly short-lived band. That was Lita Ford and Joan Jett's band. But they were kind of more in the hard rock metal type of category, and they didn't.
Their early days were different.
Yeah, I mean, the Go-Go's really developed a pop edge to them, and they did have a little edge. I think that was also part of their appeal. Like I said, I wasn't familiar with their punk background, but it didn't totally surprise me because there was always that little edge there. I never considered them a punk band. But they did have a little bit of that, so they were able to appeal to a pretty wide variety. In terms of style, I mean, that was what was going on. I mean, they looked like the girls in the 80s looked. I mean, girls I went to school with, they loved the Go-Go's. I mean, they dressed like them. I mean, to me, the epitome of what they were about is like the opening of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It opens with "We Got the Beat." Some of these songs, I hate to say it, you hear them so much and they kind of lose their context and what they meant originally. You see these songs.
Right. Because some of those popular hits are just played over and over again. You start singing it without thinking about it.
Yeah, and they lose all of their appeal. I mean, all their original appeal and their new. Sure. They lose their freshness. Like a piece of bad cheese. But you flip on Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and that opening shot of the mall, the Southern California mall with "We Got the Beat" cranking, and they're showing the video arcades and everything. That like puts me in that early 80s moment, like more than almost anything in any movie. I mean, that's like, that makes you feel really like you're right there. And that was part of the soundtrack. So, they've got all these things going on for them, and then it's always the question of like, are they good? And I think that they were good. They made good music. They wrote some great songs. It's brief. But I think it was significant for those reasons. I
think an important thing that you're getting at too is it was brief, but it was still so impactful. It was like Tina Turner's solo career. It was like one record that was super big, and bam, it put her back on the map. I think, Kiss is a different story. They have a longevity. They inspired so many different bands. My first memory of the Go-Go's was I was sitting in the TV room with my dad, and I remember my dad watching the video for I can't ever. what was it? The Vacation Getaway? What's the name of that song? I don't even know the name of that song.
Vacation. That's the name of the song.
My dad was like, hey, look at these chicks skiing. It was like a father and son bonding over these beautiful women in their skis singing rock and roll music. Back then, my dad was a music lover. He never saw anything like that before. And I think because, too, MTV was, in its early stage, in its prime, I think that definitely helped catapult the short career that the Go-Go's had. Now your next pick, I know it's spoiler alert. I'm going to let you reveal it, but your next pick is maybe not as rock and roll as the Go-Go's, but definitely a female artist. Maybe not an all-female band. What was your introduction to this next pick of yours?
Well, I would, this is an artist that I'm not deeply into. I'm talking about Carole King. I'm very familiar with Tapestry. I mean, that is her, hallmark landmark album. It's still a great album. I mean, if that was all she did, that's pretty good. It's pretty good. Is it Rock and Roll Hall of Fame worthy? There's a lot more to Carole King. She was a songwriter well before she was known as a solo artist. She was part of the Brill Building scene in New York in the 60s. So this, and you might be aware of this. So this was a building that housed, I forget which companies exactly, but Lieber and Stoller was a very popular writing duo out of there. Neil Diamond. Of course, he's in the hall. There's a little bit of precedent there, but they wrote tons of hits in this place. It was a hit-making factory. Carole King was very much part of that. So she's, even if you're not familiar with her solo music, you're certainly aware of other songs that she's written, like "You've Got a Friend," "The Locomotion," "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman." There's a whole slew of them. So she's had an impact, and I do think, again, there's kind of a feminist sensibility that she brought to early 70s singer-songwriting, the New York sound, and she later relocated out to California, was kind of in that Laurel Canyon scene with James Taylor and other people. So, I'm not as familiar with her output after Tapestry. I mean, I know some of this stuff, like Jazzman was one of the big hits she had. But I've just always known Carole King from Tapestry, and it's such a seminal album. And I would say, with people, Tori Amos, cited Carole King, but I guarantee you Lady Gaga probably has a lot to say about that influence. I would be very surprised if she wasn't influenced by Carole King. This is the female singer-songwriter at the keyboard. And there's precedent for this in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame too. Laura Nyro was kind of a similar type of character, and who had an amazing voice, not as well known, was not part of the building, but wrote a lot of pop songs too, for like The Fifth Dimension and stuff like that. Now she's in the hall, I don't. It's like this. Yeah, this female singer-songwriter, kind of soul rock, kind of straddling the boundaries of that very New York. And that was Carole King. So I think she deserves a spot.
It's funny because you mentioned Carole King. My next pick is actually somebody that sounds like Carole King. I listened to both artists today just because I was in the mood prepping for the show. Todd Rundgren is somebody that I grew up on. Here's one of my picks simply just based on nostalgia. And he has been around for a very, very long time. He started in the 60s with the Nas, And he's an East Coast guy, not New York, but out of Philadelphia. And there's something about his music that captures that singer-songwriter moment from that era. And he was a multi-instrumentalist. He played and wrote a lot of his stuff. But man, does he sound very similar to what Carole King did. And I don't know if that might have had because of his music control as a solo artist. And I finally got a chance to see him live not too many years ago, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. He was on tour with Carl Palmer and Yes. And, I went to his place out in Hawaii. He's got his own restaurant out in Kauai. He's an entrepreneur, but his following is still so big. Just to kind of recap too on our picks, Tina Turner right now, when you go to the Rock Hall website, she's currently at number 1. The Go-Go's are at number 3. And remember, the top 5 of the 16, they get in. Now, these are fan votes, but they're going to be a big influence because the Rock Hall has kind of shifted it over to the fan base. Carole King is number 6, so she's right there. Todd Rundgren is number 7. So we're very, very in line with the majority of how this vote is going to go, I guess, if that's right what I want to say. But now, Bill, your next pick is a little obscure to me. I'm not so much familiar with them, but I was introduced to them by Duff McKagan of Guns N' Roses.
Oh.
And this band that you're going to tell us about, they influenced a lot of very underrated band. Tom Morello said that this band should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They influenced so many musicians. So what's your next pick, and how were you introduced to this band?
Talk about these guys, New York Dolls. Very outrageous glam rock from early 70s New York. How was I introduced to them? I don't remember. I know I've been listening to them at least since college. Also, a very briefly lived band. There's the lead singer, David Johansen. Now, this guy went on to form an alter ego named Buster Poindexter that some of you may remember from the 90s, I guess. He had a couple of hits. Hot, Hot, Hot. Don't worry, Buster Poindexter is not going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, just in case you're wondering. But, man, this guy had a great kind of punk sensibility. I think that is the New York Dolls, their legacy. They're kind of like the first punk band. Johansen kind of bears a passing resemblance to Keith Richards, so I think a lot of people thought of them as like Rolling Stones ripoffs. To me, there's also a little bit of an Aerosmith thing going on, but they might have predated Aerosmith a little bit, or at least they came out around the same time. But man, these guys are a trip. I mean, first of all, they're all dead now except for Johansen, the lead singer. A lot of problems. That's kind of why they were so short-lived. A lot of drugs and stuff going on in the band. In terms of influence, their image, first of all, they made good music. I mean, very straightforward, hard rocking stuff. I would say, what would I compare it to? I don't know. It's nothing complicated, but if they were trying to imitate the Rolling Stones, they didn't do it very well, and in the process created something that was kind of crude. And I think that's why that's where the punk influence came from.
Yeah, it was almost like the bridge between the Rolling Stones and the Ramones.
Yes. Well, and here's the thing. Okay, image-wise, they kind of came out of where the Ramones did. I mean, they were all New York guys. They were part of a glam scene that was going on in New York at the time that Kiss ultimately came out of. There were other bands that never made it. They were very, I don't know how else to describe it. Very effeminate in the way, but it was kind of a put on type of thing. I don't know. There was a kooky scene going on in New York at the time. You know, there were a lot of these like drag queen type of clubs and stuff. Bette Midler came out of that scene, believe it or not, and so did Barry Manilow. So there was kind of this underground scene in New York, and the Dolls came out of that. You know, so they're unusual. They're kind of this androgynous type of thing. You know, Bowie was doing that at the time too. But their sound was very heavy. And I know Johansson was a big Black Sabbath fan. I mean, they don't sound like Black Sabbath, but it is very hard driving, you know, kind of blues-based rock and roll. And I mean, if you're going to look at the progenitors of punk, you know, it's definitely New York Dolls are in there. Stooges, who are in the hall, MC5, who are not, they should be.
Yeah,
and other short-lived bands. These are all very short-lived bands. They had like 2 albums, all of them.
Well, MC5 had 3 albums, but man, you know what? We will save. I could chat all night about MC5. yeah,
we'll save that. But a couple of final points about New York Dolls. They and if you look at them, you might have noticed the image, the manner in which they looked, very much, I think, was copped by some of the later metal, like hair metal, glam metal that came in the 80s. Like, you know, that whole Sunset Strip scene, like Poison and Motley Crue and that kind of stuff. I mean, they very much had that attitude going on. I mean, they were certainly an influence on Kiss. I mean, there was kind of another glam thing that was going on in the 70s with like Kiss, and then early 80s Twisted Sister, I think very much kind of came from, you know, these guys would go up wearing like dresses and stuff like that. It was this whole androgynous thing they were doing. You know, Kiss didn't do that. I mean, they kind of went in a different direction, but it was that theater of that I think they definitely adopted.
It was the 1970s theatrics, you know, that you could even say that David Bowie was almost a pioneer of that as well, you know. T-Rex kind of planted the tree, and then David Bowie took it to the next level, and then, you know, it went on this whole different East Coast. See, people quit smoking pot and taking LSD when the 60s were over, and then they started doing cocaine and drinking booze. Then it became this theatrical rock kind of thing. It's very interesting how music has changed severely in the early days, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s even. But then music in general has just been like a slow hold of China. I mean, it's just been very dull and very boring, and it's not like it used to be, man. There's nothing really new. That's why we love the old music, because those are the people that were fresh then. And it's still refreshing to look at what they did now, because nothing like it's been done after they did it, you know?
Yeah, and it was fake. I mean, it was not fake. It wasn't like they were necessarily trying to imitate something that came before. I mean, they had their influences, but a lot of it was like reaction. You know, I mean, that whole punk thing and what was going on in New York that I was talking about, I mean, it was very much of, you know, a reaction to like what was going on with prog music, and, you know, stuff was getting very bombastic, and they stripped it down to some bare essentials, and it was fun too. I mean, and New York Dolls is also similar to MC5 and the other bands I mentioned too, is that they were more exciting live for sure. I don't think their studio stuff quite captured the outrageousness of the stage presentation, you know. And there's video and stuff that you can go see of them on YouTube, and it's just crazy. It's crazy, man. Those guys were a real piece of work.
You know, and again, Tom Morello, who, you know, guitar player from Rage Against the Machine, he had said that these guys deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You know, they are parked right now. They are parked at number 13 out of 16. And that leads me to my next pick. God, man, Rage Against the Machine. They are my top 5 favorite band of all time. These guys were the people's band. They picked up where the MC5 left off, but without the drugs. They had a mission. They were very, very political. And they're parked at number 11. But I tell you, like, right now, this is from the Lollapalooza tour. These guys put PMRC across their chest. Here they are burning a flag. This is obviously pre-9/11. They used to do the upside down flag, imagery, and they were just, they weren't anti-American. They were just anti-corporation, and they were anti what the dark side of America was about. And I tell you, as far as talent goes, these guys, every time I went to a concert, a lot of people say, I saw Grateful Dead, I saw the Allman Brothers a gazillion times. In a short career that these guys had, I had probably seen them 17 times. I felt like I was going to the classroom when I was at a Rage Against the Machine concert. Zach, the singer, his dad was a Mexican revolutionary, and he kind of spoke a certain gospel. Tom was the father of an activist, 2 activists. Both of his parents were activists. His dad left him at an early age. Again, I recommend checking out that Tom Morello interview. And here I am trying to not stir up the political floor, but Tom Morello, he's very outspoken. A lot of people would call him he would call himself a communist. They were a band that had a message, and their talent was off the charts. Tom Morello went to Harvard, graduated from Harvard, and that guy could play the guitar so well. So I don't know if they're going to get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just because their message, I think, is too strong for the masses to get a hold of, a grasp of. But that is one band that I cannot wait to see again because they reunited. And, like I said, I've seen them so many times, so educational, opened my mind to so much. They were heavily inspired by everything that was going on in the late 60s, from Malcolm X to Martin Luther King Jr. I saw Tom Morello in concert. In 2019, he played at the Vic. He invited everybody up on stage. He said, nobody touch my shit. Otherwise, I'm going to walk off the stage. And he closed with John Lennon's Power to the People. And everybody was in this circle singing this song. And the lights were on everybody. And it was just a magical communal moment that is very not often repeated. It's almost, I don't know, it's very hard to describe my love for Rage Against the Machine, but I will say, as much as I love music, they're my top 5 favorite band. They're probably the most vocal I would be about everybody that I've chosen tonight. So, how about your next pick? You're a number 4, and these guys have inspired a lot of people as well.
My 4th pick is the Foo Fighters. I think they're, I don't know. I don't have too much. To me, they kind of speak for themselves. So I don't know how much who doesn't know the Foo Fighters? They seem to be the ambassadors of rock, or at least they have been for the last 10 or 15 years. They just seem to be everywhere. I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm like a diehard fan of theirs. Okay. I'm not going into a critique of them. I like them a lot. I think they rock. They've been around, it's amazing when I think that I still kind of think of them as like a new band, but they've been around for 25 years. They have that lineage with Nirvana, with Dave Grohl, and I think that gives a little street cred to things. I think they're all phenomenal musicians, great songwriters. You know, they write. I mean, the stuff they come out with it's heavy, but it has a pop sensibility. I guess you call that pop. What was that called? Power pop, I think.
Yeah, power pop. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, it's kind of like Weezer kind of has that to a degree. Weezer's probably more in the pop category. But they're heavy. So I think Foo Fighters kind of has that going on. They're continuing to put out good music. I think they have a lot of great songs. I mean, Everlong, Generator, Long Road to Ruin, My Hero. So we used to do one of these songs, Learn to Fly.
Yeah,
very
that
cool.
video was great, man.
Yeah,
the Learn to Fly video. That was like one of the best videos ever made, like post MTV era. I want to say that one of the coolest things about the Foo Fighters is Dave Grohl came from, talk about a band that had a very short-lived career, but so impactful, was Nirvana. I mean, he is the ashes from Kurt Cobain,
Yeah.
And what Nirvana did in the early 90s, and he's still doing it, and he's still now, I tried to Google this. I want to say he might be on the board of directors with Tom Morello, but like I said, Howard Stern said the board of Hall of Fame directors is it's like the Illuminati. It's very secret society based. I do know that a lot of Bruce Springsteen's people are involved in it. And I think that's what's kind of helping it, bring back more meaning than what it was in the beginning.
Yeah, maybe get in some of these overlooked bands that are long past due.
Yeah, you mentioned that. And I think that's what the problem was.
It seems like a few more are getting in, But back to Foo Fighters real quick. I mean, if you look at their contemporaries that they have in there, I mean, again, it's almost self-explanatory when you consider that Green Day, Pearl Jam, Chili Peppers. They go back further, but I don't know. I always kind of think of them as like a '90s band, too. Who else? Radiohead, I guess, even though they're English. But I think you get what I'm saying. I mean, if those bands can get in, they got in very early, in terms of their eligibility. Certainly the Foo Fighters can be in that club.
Well, I think, the Foo Fighters should have been in before Green Day. And, you talk about those four bands that you mentioned in that last sentence, Radiohead. That, again, like the MC5, I could chat for an hour about that band alone. Those guys, yes, they deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But again, it's like you have Todd Rundgren that started in like the late 60s, 67, 68. He's a nominee this year, and Green Day's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Right.
I mean, it's, again, tonight we're not trying to argue who should be in and who shouldn't be in. We're making a point, though, that it's taking a long time for some of these bands to get into the Rock and Roll.
Judas Priest.
I want to get to my number 4 pick before we turn it up to a mutual pick that is more deserving than Judas Priest.
Turn it up to 11.
My 4th pick is Fela Kuti. And we talked about him on the last episode when we talked about Ginger Baker. This is the guy that was from Nigeria, Fela Kuti, and Ginger Baker jammed with him. I had no idea who this guy was until I watched the documentary. Now, he is a multi-instrumentalist. He's a multi-instrumentalist. He's a band leader, composer, political activist. He's done so much. His music is what I've been listening to over the last 4 weeks. This guy's music is super infectious, And, you know, he's influenced people from Brian Eno to David Byrne. He came up with Afrobeat. This is a genre that was introduced to jazz musicians. His music is timeless. I recommend lighting up a big joint and listening to his music. And if you don't smoke, just listen to his music and you'll find yourself dancing in the kitchen. His mother was a women's rights activist of Nigeria. So again, music with political meaning. I don't know why that is attractive to me, but it is. I love music that has a message and a meaning. And, you know, Jimi Hendrix has been on stage, you know, kind of poo-pooing the message sometimes. He just wanted to get up there and rock and roll. But Fela Kuti is definitely deserving of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just because he played with Ginger Baker alone. And that was his early days. I think Ginger Baker is an inspiration to him. And they built that studio together in Africa. And, you know, he's at number 2. Tina's at number 1. He's at number 2. I had no idea that this guy was even known. I'm like, okay, this is somebody that Ginger Baker jammed with. He jammed with a lot of people, took a lot of drugs, wrote some great music. But, you know, the people that Ginger Baker played with, again, they were all brilliant musicians. They were madmen, but brilliant musicians. So one band that I know.
Wait, can I stop you just for a second, Chris? I just want to clarify. When you say he's number 2, what is this again? Is this the public's polling of the nominees?
Yes, this is the public polling. When you go to rockhall.com, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame website, it'll give you all 16 nominees. And you know, you pick 5, and 5 people get in every year. 5 people get in every year. So these are
right.
This is the public poll, but I think ultimately it has an influence because the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame wants to listen to the people now. You know,
but my point is that he's polling at number 2. I that's very surprising to me.
I mean,
I think so.
You know what? I know the Ginger Baker camp is still a strong following, and I know they're kind of petitioning for him to get in there. But it's working, man, because he's at number 2 with 16.
It's the Ginger Baker Air Force or whatever.
Yeah. Well, no, at this point, it's a Ginger Baker ghost militia.
Yeah.
But man, you know,
what a great name for a band. Yeah.
His music, like I said, it's so infectious. It's very, like I said, it's Afrobeat. It's very jazz oriented, but it's timeless, man. I mean, it's such the timing of this music, the signature timing is just it's brilliant. And I feel like it's very undiscovered, but apparently not because he's at number 2. So. But one band that people have been bitching and complaining about behind Rush, behind Kiss, behind Black Sabbath, behind Priest is
rightfully
a band
so.
that we picked together. It was our only mutual pick, but it is Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden. And Iron Maiden is actually parked at number 4. Iron Maiden is parked at number 4. So there's a very, very good chance.
Eddie the Ed is this what they call it?
Eddie the Head, yes. Eddie is their mascot. But I tell you, man, what was your introduction to Iron Maiden? Was it Killers, the Paul Di'Anno era?
Gosh, I don't know. I feel like I've been listening to them forever. I know that's not true. I want to say sometime in junior high, I got into them. So it might have been, when did Power Slave came out? No, it might have been Number of the Beast. What year did Number of the Beast come out?
That was 1982. 1982.
Because I think the first album I bought by them was Peace of Mind, and I know I knew Run to the Hills. I might not have had that album though. So I want to say 83, 84 was when I started listening to them. And, you know, I have since come to really love the now, are they including Paul Di'Anno and Clive?
You know, I would think, and I would hope so, because Paul Di'Anno is still alive and well. He's still, once in a while he tours. Oddly enough, the last time he was in Chicago was on Christmas Day in probably the early 2000s. That's why I did not go to the show. You know, the first album that I bought the first album that I purchased with my own money was Somewhere in Time. And
I saw them. I saw them on that tour.
Okay, so they played on March 13th in 1986. And I begged my mom to take me to that concert. And my mom's like, "That is your brother's birthday?" She's like, "My head will be..." So I can't take you on Nathan's birthday. March 13th, 1986. I'll never forget how much I begged my mom.
I was there, man.
And you were there. You were there.
Yeah, I was there.
That was the first album that I purchased with my own. You know what? That might have been 1987. They did the tour.
I think so. Should I go dig up my ticket stub?
You know what? Yeah, well, you know, actually, on Music Monday, we'll do a ticket stub.
I have an album. I have it in the other room, actually.
I did see Iron Maiden eventually, and I had seen them. You know, the first time I saw them was on No Prayer for the Dying, when they added the third guitar player. But again, a band with a message, right? When I went to an Iron Maiden concert, or when I listened to Iron Maiden, in general, a lot of people confuse them with Satanism just because the PMRC was very anti-Iron Maiden because Number of the Beast.
Well,
I learned so much.
It was even before the PMRC. I mean, PMRC was a reaction to other things that were going on. There was like the Night Stalker. They were tying heavy metal in with all this crazy stuff. I felt like the thing about Iron Maiden was I learned so much British history from that band. Well, I remember when I was in high school, my English teacher had us read Kubla Khan by the poet's name is Coleridge. And I knew it because that's what Rime of the Ancient Mariner is about, I think. No, wait a minute. No, it's that Kubla Khan is Rush Xanadu. Okay, I'm getting my but Coleridge also wrote Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and we studied both of those poems, and I knew them inside and out from those songs. And I remember my teacher was very impressed. I don't know if I filled him in on where my knowledge came from, but Well, that's the thing. When I was in junior high, when I was in high school, I always wanted to share my education, like from Iron Maiden, for example. I wanted to tell my teachers, like, hey, I'm learning this through heavy metal. Because there was this stereotype associated with heavy metal, you know, just the evil and the Satanism alone. And the bands were just so much more than that. They were very, very educational. Yeah. Well, you know what? I remember my parents were, at least my mom was a little freaked out about it at first. But you know what changed her mind was when I started playing guitar. You know, she figured, well, if you really love music and want to learn it and get to know it, and that just changed her mind completely. And plus, I was a good kid. I wasn't doing anything. But I remember, oh man, I'm going to go off on a tangent. Maybe I shouldn't share this story. But oh yeah, you should share this story. Well, there was, you know, what Chris is talking about. There was this kind of fear of like devil worship, and I mean, and it was getting kind of goofy. I mean, there was like people were saying that there were backwards messages that were compelling people to do things and like kill themselves, and it was getting kind of nutty. Now that didn't really change, phase me at all. I just kept listening to whatever I wanted to listen to. But one of the first concerts I went to was AC/DC. And I remember my mom was she didn't want me going. And I think I was only 12 or 13. And I was going with my brother. And at that time was this serial killer in California, this guy, Richard Ramirez, who was called the Night Stalker. And I guess he was a fan of heavy metal. I don't even know what the whole connection was. There was this song that AC/DC had called Night Prowler, and that was tied into this somehow.
Yeah,
and it was getting a lot of bad press, and they, and I mean, AC/DC is anything but. I mean, really, which to them was kind of to my mother was kind of shocking looking. But she, I mean, God bless my mom. She let me go, and there was trust that was established there, But it's so funny because that music is so mild compared to stuff that has come later. I mean, it wasn't nearly as graphic, or, I mean, to me, it was like, I never really got into, I don't know, the imagery appealed to me in the sense of like a horror movie, I thought it was fun. It was theater. That's what I liked. I mean, if you go see a horror movie, nobody says, oh, you're, say Satanist because you like that, because you like The Exorcist, I mean, nobody would ever say something like that. I mean,
you like watching people die on screen. You're a murderer.
No, we like being scared, because it's fun. It's theater, and the music was good. I mean, it was quality. These guys were virtuoso musicians, so and it inspired us to play guitar, and that was what I did. And and getting back to Maiden, just to bring it full circle, I mean, Maiden was certainly part of that whole scene. And one of the best bands, great guitar, had this dual guitar signature sound that was so amazing, the harmony guitars and stuff. And the fact that they have not, that they still, I mean, they're still not in the hall. I mean, they still have to be, put in. I mean, I hope that this is going to be their chance to finally get in. But it's criminal they're not in this.
Right.
I mean, just how long they've been together, how influential they are.
And they're still together. They're still
one of the most successful bands of all time, period. Forget heavy metal. I mean, why are they not in the Hall of Fame? I mean, that's absurd. So
I know you mentioned Judas Priest. Iron Maiden is 100 times more deserving than Priest is, in my opinion. And we could get into that. You know what? We're going to do a Music Monday where we chat just about metal.
Iron Maiden versus Judas Priest, yeah.
But I think Iron Maiden's going to get in because they're parked at number 4 on the fan poll, and it's going to fluctuate. Now, you guys have until April 30th. You can vote once a day. And hey, I want to thank you guys for joining us on Mocktails from the Cantina Live. Do not forget about Patreon. Patreon is so important. That's what's keeping this stuff going on. I want to thank the guests too. We got Bill. Bill, this is your 3rd appearance in like the last couple shows, man. And Bill, I got to tell you, congratulations on your Mocktails YouTube episode, because that is the fastest rising viewing-wise of Mocktails of all time.
Which episode was that? Was it the music one or the?
No, it wasn't the music one. It was the one where we did the vintage trivia. That thing is skyrocketing. I mean, you're going to beat your brother out, man.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? Nice.
But hey, and if you guys go over to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame website, check that out. They're actually doing a chat starting in 1 minute with John Densmore of The Doors, the drummer of The Doors. They are doing their virtual shows, I should say, over there. It's free, so check that out. And thanks again for watching, man. So, Bill, thank you again for spending your Monday night.
My pleasure. Thanks for
Tyler. I'm going to bring Tyler back on. Tyler, thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
The controls. It was a smooth Smooth ride tonight. I appreciate that. So, hey, again, guys, thank you for watching Mocktails from the Cantina. Be sure to check us out on Patreon. The YouTube shows are always free. And may the mock be with you. Keep listening to music, play it loud, and we will see you guys next time on Mocktails from the Cantina. So long, everybody.